spied for the Soviet KGB and received $1 million.
Spying has been called the second oldest profession in the world. 1985 would become known as the year of the spy, when 4 Americans committed treason.
Every time you caught one, it was worse than the one before.
More astounding was the fact that they worked for 4 different intelligence agencies.
Each of these agencies never believed their own people would turn against them.
The breadth of the penetration and the damage done to naval and military operations, the loss of top-secret codes, and the execution of our own spy, accepting that his lucrative double life was ending.
In the car, being driven to a place where he was questioned, he was overheard saying, "Think, think, think," as though he might still somehow be able to get out of this fix he was in.
Presented with the evidence gathered against him, Ames made a deal. He pled guilty so that his wife Rosario would get a reduced sentence. It was apparent from the wiretaps that she had known about his spying. Rosario Ames received a 5-year sentence. On April 28, 1994, Aldrich Ames, 53, was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole.
He took an objective view of this. He said at the time, you know, this is the business of espionage. They took their chances, I took my chances. I think he used that expression.
Aldrich Ames is serving his time at the Allenwood Federal Penitentiary in Pennsylvania.
I spent about 8 hours interviewing Aldrich Ames in prison in 1994. What's he like? He's arrogant. He is unctuous, oily, in a kind of a sleazy, charming way, like a snake. He's smart, but he disguised that fact by being drunk for most of his career. He is unrepentant.
And for those he betrayed, even Ames' arrest can never bring back their lost years.
What I would say to him in prison, in his prison, I would say that repentance or his confession as a human being is not sufficient.
As a result of the Ames case, after years of animosity and distrust, a joint FBI-CIA team was formed to investigate future espionage cases. With more cooperation between the CIA and FBI and the end of the Cold War, many in government thought the worst days of spying were over, until FBI agent Robert Henson proved what a dangerous assumption that could be. Robert Henson, a senior counterintelligence analyst with the FBI, may turn out to be the most treacherous and destructive spy of the past century. Henson spied for the Russians on and off for 20 years, even through the transition from the Soviet Union to the new Russian state. The FBI arrested Henson on February 18, 2001, as he made a delivery to the Russians at Foxstone Park, near his home in Vienna, Virginia. Earlier in the day, he had left a signal for the Russians, a strip of white adhesive tape on the park sign. As arranged, he drove back to the park later in the afternoon, walked over the small wooden footbridge, and placed a package of secret documents underneath. The FBI had him under surveillance and moved in.
He didn't say a word. Not a single word, but one FBI agent told me that his shoulders slumped and he just sort of went limp because he knew it was just over.
The FBI is still assessing the extent of the damage done by Henson. But what is now known is frightening, especially in light of the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center and Pentagon. Henson had revealed to the Russians one of the U.S. government's most highly guarded secrets, the continuity of government, or doomsday plan.
That is our ultimate disaster survival plan. This is what you do at time of attack.
Get everybody back.
The attack on the World Trade Center, you saw that go into action. Where did the president go? Where did the leadership go? Where did the intelligence community go? You heard about the fact that the CIA left the building. Well, they didn't go out of business. They relocated. Where? That's the secret. Well, that whole ability to respond in time of a disaster is one of the greatest secrets that any government has.
Hansen had also revealed sensitive satellite operations, as well as a $250 million tunnel the U.S. had built in 1985 under the Russian embassy in Washington, D.C. The tunnel, loaded with sophisticated eavesdropping equipment, became worthless overnight.
When I look at Bob and I try to figure out what's motivating him to do all this, the thing that keeps crossing my mind is ambition. This is not money, it's not revenge, this is about being the best spy that there ever was in history against the United States for the Soviet Union.
Hansen joined the FBI in 1976. 2 years later, when he worked in New York City, he began his spying activities.
In the name of the Father.
He claims he approached the Soviets because he needed money to pay for his kids' parochial school tuitions. His wife, Bonnie, found out and confronted him.
She catches him counting out the money. Well, she literally freaks. She's very upset, and she says, "You've got to give it back. You can't do this." He goes to a priest, and the priest says, "Okay, here's what you're going to do. Don't do it anymore. Donate the money to Mother Teresa, and all will be forgotten." And that's what happened.
But 7 years later, in 1985, Hansen started spying again.
He was not a happy spy.
Dr. Alan Solarian, who spent several hours with Hansen in prison after his arrest, thinks Hansen returned to spying for reasons that had little to do with money.
Internal demons, because he was fighting other battles internally, psychologically. His biggest problem was not spying. His biggest problem were other psychological issues.
Robert Hansen is an enigma, a man who led two completely separate lives, each constantly at war with the other.
He said in the course of our discussions that that this whole activity was sort of like a Jekyll and Hyde situation, where the bad guy took over at times.
It seems like he had a bifurcated personality, almost a split personality, where one side of him could be completely church-going, moral and patriotic, and the other side of him can be the mirror image, the person who doesn't care that he's getting other people killed.
Unlike Ames, who flaunted his wealth, Hansen did everything he could to hide the millions he was making from the Russians. At the time he was arrested, he was living with his wife Bonnie and 6 children in a modest middle-class community in Vienna, Virginia. His family, friends, and neighbors thought him the epitome of an upright and moral man.
It just boggles the mind that Bob Hansen, on one hand, could rail against communism, say it's the worst thing in the world, be so patriotic, always espoused conservative moral values. On the other hand, of course, he's delivering material to the most sensitive material, nuclear materials, the strongest material we had, to communism.
Hansen seemed more at home in a world of extremes. A convert to Catholicism, he attended daily Mass and became a member of the ultra-conservative Catholic group Opus Dei. But at the same time, the conservative, moral-minded Hansen was spending thousands of dollars on a stripper, Priscilla Gailey, who he had met in 1989 at a Washington, D.C. striptease joint called Joanna's 1819 Club.
This is Victoria.
She claimed they never had a sexual relationship, even though Hansen bought her a Mercedes, a diamond and emerald necklace, and took her on a trip to Hong Kong.
He wanted me to go to a priest and confess. I guess he thought I had some deep, dark, secret sins, maybe, that I needed to get off my chest to change my life.
He certainly gave more money to Priscilla Sue Gailey than he ever gave to Opus Dei. which shows you how twisted his mind became.
Hansen's twisted behavior became even more apparent when investigators learned that he had sent naked pictures of his wife, Bonnie, to his best friend, Jack Hoschauer, and he installed a closed-circuit television camera in his bedroom so that Jack could view the Hansens' lovemaking when he visited their home. Hansen also created an adult website, writing erotic stories using his own name and Bonnie's. Hansen would quit spying again in 1991 and stay dormant for 8 years. But in 1999, he resumed spying once again.
He needed a thrill, he needed a rush. Maybe the $600,000 that he had gotten had run out. And 7 years had gone by, and his name had never come up. He had checked the computers of the FBI. No one seemed to be looking for him. No one seems to be suspecting him. So why not start again?
Hansen seemed driven by a compulsion that went far deeper than money and would send him back to his secret life of spying. Some clues to Hansen's complex personality would come to light as investigators started looking into his past. The roots of Hansen's spying may go back to his family roots. As an only child, he idolized his father, a Chicago policeman, but he never lived up to his father's expectations.
Bob Hansen's father, I think we're finding, is turning out to be quite a brute, who really treated Bob very shamelessly. Bob, who was a high school science guy who was not a good athlete. His father is a Chicago police, big, tough guy, and Bob is not the kind of son he wants. He's the only son he has.
All his life, Robert Hansen was an outsider.
Some people have called Bob Hansen a geek. He was always a loner, a little bit strange.
In 1966, Hansen graduated from Knox College near Chicago. He went on to study dentistry at Northwestern University. There, a fellow dental student, Robert Lauren, remembers Hansen being a bit eccentric.
Bob dressed as weirdly as anyone could have at Northwestern Dental School because he wore all the time a black suit, usually a wool suit, I think, a white polyester shirt, and a black and blue or black and red rep stripe tie. Invariably, the same outfit, even under his gowns when we were dissecting cadavers, even under his gowns when we were doing really very dirty lab work.
He also recalls Hansen's obsession with a book on Kim Philby, the famous British traitor who spied for the Soviet Union during and after World War II.
And when I saw the pictures of Bob Hansen on the cover of a magazine, my mind immediately went to the Philby book, because that wonderful smile of his, those great white big rectangular teeth of his that I remembered when he was smiling with what could be done and what you could get away with, something like what Kim Philby did. And then when I saw his head, this is like 30 years later, it was like, oh my God, he really did it.
Hansen dropped out of dental school after 2 years and followed in his father's footsteps, joining the Chicago police force. If he seemed a bit strange in dental school, he was considered the perfect candidate for the police elite C5 undercover team.
He was exceptionally bright. You know, he looked to be an honest, hardworking, bright policeman who came to me with excellent recommendations and excellent credentials.
After 3 years with C5, Hansen joined the FBI in 1976. Ernie Rizzo, a fellow undercover cop, believes even back then he had become addicted to the rush of an undercover life.
I think somewhere along the line he went over the edge from the normal high and just completely lost it. But I can understand where it's a high, and when you're working undercover all your life, you just see how far you can go. It's like Michael Jordan shooting baskets. You know, how many baskets can you shoot? I can't give this up. I'll come back out of retirement 5 times just to prove I can still do it. Same mentality.
So spying was that kind of complication for Bob Hansen. And he knew that it was destructive, it was horrible, but it was giving him temporary relief from the inner pain that he was experiencing.
Hansen's career as a spy began to unravel during millennium year 2000. A former KGB agent, whose name remains classified, turned over Hansen's file to the FBI.
Bob Hansen made one huge mistake. Every time he delivered and made drops to the Russians, he wrapped it in a plastic bag. He probably thought, oh, well, they'll throw away the garbage bag and just keep the documents. Oh, no, the Russians, they kept the garbage bags, and his fingerprints was on the garbage bags.
After his arrest, and only weeks before his scheduled retirement, 57-year-old Robert Hansen was indicted on 21 counts of espionage. The government dropped its attempts to get the death penalty when Hansen agreed to tell all in exchange for his wife and children getting his pension. In return, the government agreed to life imprisonment without parole.
When Hansen was captured, arrested in the United States, someone called me and said, "What a coup." I said, "Wrong. The coup was the Russians. They had Ames and they had Hansen."
But ironically, it's the Russians who can be credited with helping uncover American traitors. Since 1985, former KGB agents have tipped off their American counterparts. That the American spy agencies were unable to find spies themselves was a subject of criticism by Congress.
Makes you wonder, is anybody ever fired out at that place? Seriously, that was my question, and that's going to be my question of the director tomorrow when he comes up here. What do you have to do to be fired?
President Bill Clinton, before leaving office, issued a directive establishing a new office to coordinate the different counterintelligence agencies in the hopes of identifying spies sooner.
We realized that we weren't sharing intelligence, we weren't working together, we weren't cooperating.
You got anything to say, Mr. Haynes?
And the more spies we had, the more Congress in particular was saying, hey, there's a problem here. And we don't want to stop it after the fact, we want to stop it before it happens.
In the aftermath of the September 11th attacks on the World Trade Center and Pentagon, it's obvious that temptations are greater than ever today for would-be spies. Rogue states, terrorists, and even allies are all vying for American intelligence, both military and technological.
One of the best analogies I ever heard came from Jim Woolsey, the former DCI. We slayed the dragon, and as we cut him open, 1,000 poisonous snakes fell out. And that's exactly what we're faced with today.
Since the late 80s and the early 90s, the numbers of countries and numbers of non-state actors, as we say, that have become interested in the United States and its technology, its economy, its academia has risen exponentially. And we are faced with one of the biggest challenges in our history.
And former KGB General Oleg Kalugin believes it would still be wise to keep an eye on our old adversary.
Russians have preserved imperial mentality. As a nation, they feel humiliated. People who served in the KGB, in the party hierarchy, and even thousands and maybe millions of ordinary people who lost faith in the future because of the impoverishment and dismemberment of the former USSR. These people feel nostalgic about the old days, and they want to restore the old great Russia.
Even today, for some, money, sex, and revenge can overcome patriotism. And it's likely that spying will continue to be the second oldest profession.
You'd have to say that with Ames operating the way he did for a decade, with Hansen at the FBI for over a decade, with the Walkers penetrating the most sensitive secrets of all for over 15 years, I don't think you could say with any assurance that we've gotten everyone, which is why they call this business the wilderness of mirrors.
After Robert Hansen was finally caught, an independent commission headed by former FBI Director William Webster was asked to investigate how Hansen had escaped detection for so long. Hansen claimed that any file clerk could download classified material from the FBI's computerized case system and simply carry it out the front door. The spy called FBI's internal security pathetic. The commission agreed with him. For the History Channel, I'm Roger Mudd. Thanks for watching.